In our last episode, we created an automation that will save us a lot of time. However, we're not done yet. We still have a couple of issues. First, we don't want to take into account our tests during our pipeline. So if we release code with broken tests, it goes out to production. Second, we're only rolling out deploys to our web app service, but we need the changes to also be rolled out to our factory worker service. Let's start by addressing our testing issue. Here's what we'd like to happen. Once our pipeline is notified of changes to our master branch, we'd first want to run our test. Then, if the tests pass, we'd move on to the next phase in the build deploy cycle. In order to make this happen, we need to do two things. We need to add an additional build spec, and we need to create an additional build spec in our pipeline. So let's jump over to our code and add an additional build spec. I'm going to name this build spec buildspec.test.yml. This is a pretty simple build spec. We are installing Node.js for our test.require.js, installing gems, and running our test suite. Once we've committed that code, we can jump back into our AWS console and go to our pipeline. When we're on our pipeline dashboard, we can see two buttons at the top, Edit and Release Change. We haven't mentioned them yet. Edit is self-explanatory, but the Release Change button will kick off a new build deploy, much like pushing a new commit to master would. So let's click Edit to modify our pipeline. Once we are on the Edit page, we can see there are several things we can do. We have the option to add a new stage between each of the existing stages of our current pipeline, as well as modify the current stages to add serial or parallel actions. Since we want our test stage to happen before our build stage, we need to click on the stage element before our build stage. Once we click that, a new container is added. We need to give this new stage a name. I'm going to name it Test. Then we would need to click on the Action button. When we click Action, we should see an Add Action window open up on the right side of the page. This is where we will be configuring a new code build. The first thing we need to do is select an action category. We need to choose Test from the dropdown. Next, we need to name the action and choose a test provider. I'm going to name ours Producaton Test and choose AWS CodeBuild from the dropdown. After we choose AWS CodeBuild, it will expand some additional options that need to be selected. First, we have the option of selecting an existing build or creating a new build. Since this build will be different than our existing CodeBuild project, we'll need to select Create a New Build Project. For the environment image, we're going to leave Use an Image Managed by AWS CodeBuild selected. For the operating system, we're going to choose Ubuntu. For the runtime, we're going to choose Ruby. For the version, I'm going to choose AWS CodeBuild Ruby 2.3.1. Under the service role settings, I'm going to choose Create a New Service Role in your account and set the role name to Producaton Test. For the remainder of the settings, we can leave the defaults and click Save Build Project. After we've saved the code build project, we can set the input artifacts number 1 to the output of the source stage. If you click the text box, it should drop down with a selection. Ours is called My App. Once everything is filled out, we should have a configuration similar to this. Once we've verified all of our settings are correct, we can click Add Action to see our updated code pipeline project. To make these changes permanent, we'll need to click the Save Pipeline Changes button at the top of the page. Once we've saved our pipeline changes, our new pipeline should look similar to this. Now, before we can start a new release, we need to make one additional change. When you are adding a code build project from CodePipeline, you don't have the option to configure the build spec file that will be used, so it defaults to buildspec.yml. However, we are already using that file for our Docker build, and we named our test build spec to buildspec.test.yml. In order to fix this, we need to click on the AWS CodeBuild link in our new test stage, which should redirect us to our CodeBuild project, where we can make that change. Once we are in our CodeBuild project, we can click Edit Project and scroll down to the Environment section. Within that section, we should see an Update Build Specification link that we can click on, which will show a couple of options. In the build spec name, we need to set that to buildspec.test.yml. Once we've updated that file, we can scroll to the bottom of the page and click Update. Now we can head back over to our pipeline and click Release Change to test our new changes. Once we've verified that the new deploy is working, we can begin setting up our pipeline to also deploy our changes to the factory workers. For that, we need to go back to our pipeline and click Edit. Once we are here, we need to edit the staging stage by clicking the pencil icon. Now we have the ability to add an action in a series of parallel. we want to add an additional deploy to our worker service by clicking on the action link next to our current action. This will bring up a window on the right that will allow us to configure the action. From here, the process should be similar to how we initially configured the web app deploy action. We need to select deploy for the action category. Once we choose the deploy option, we are presented with more configuration options. We need to name our action. I've named ours worker deploy. Then we need to select Amazon ECS for our deployment provider. After we choose the deployment provider, we'll see some additional options. For this, we need to choose our cluster, Producaton, our service name, worker, our image file, image definitions, and our input artifact, my app build. This is the output from our build stage. Our settings should look similar to this. Once we've verified our settings, we can click Add Action, and then scroll to the top of our pipeline edit page and click Save Pipeline Changes. Our updated pipeline should look like the following. If we want to check our new build to make sure it works correctly, we can click the Release Change and verify both servers are deployed. After the test and build stages have completed, we should see both services have been updated in parallel. Now, the last thing we want to do is take a look at fixing those pesky broken tests. Let's first remove the skips that we had in place and commit the broken tests to make sure our pipeline fails to deploy. Now, we should be able to jump back over to our pipeline to see if it fails to deploy. Perfect. So now all we need to do is fix our broken tests and we can push up a new build and our latest changes should be rolled out automatically. Now, we should be able to switch over back to our pipeline and verify that our changes fixed our broken build and are deployed. How much easier is that versus what we've been doing for the last several videos? Now we can spend much more time focusing on delivering features for our users and less time on repetitive processes. In today's video, we've updated and optimized our code pipeline. If we wanted to take this further to improve our development workflow, we could disable pushes to master in GitHub and create a new code build project to run our tests, or possibly use our existing one, and have GitHub only notify AWS of our PR creations or updates. Then we can lock down our PRs to only be merged to master if the code build project was successful and we have reviews. If you've used any integrations for blocking PR merges in the past, this would give you a similar workflow.